So in preparation of one of my more requested video topics, gonna be how to make good teams in Loomian Legacy, I'm gonna be doing a metagame tier list on April 2024. This is gonna be at the time of the Dragon raid. I don't think anything is gonna be added in terms of Loomian content in the UMB revamp, so I'm gonna be praying for that. And of course, PvP 2.0 will be coming soon after that, not adding any new Loomians. So this is gonna be a very solid tier list for all of that. This is also going to be happening before the presumed Ursnec nerfs and all of that, tank nerfs and all of that, so keep that in mind. And yeah, I pretty much established the timestamp of this whole event. And of course, let me just go over the tiers real quick. Uber's tier, you got the Metronet forms, no debate over that. You got Swirl, which is mainly in Ubers just because of its ability. And then for Cephalops, I'm gonna make a video on this eventually, explaining why it's Ubers, because we still have some doubters apparently, and this is a competitive tier list. This is not gonna be going over what you see in the Coliseum. It's gonna go over in competitive. So yeah, so I'm gonna be going over all of my thoughts, going from up to down or just however I see fit. So let's get right into the video. So I think the best place to start is with the starters, and that means by Loomipedia over. Usually when I talk about things that haven't changed much in viability rankings, I just put them right here, but it kind of wastes, or they kind of just doesn't do a lot of time for the viewers to actually know my stuff and my opinions on them, so let me fly them through quickly. Loomians that haven't changed their rankings are Seer Knight and Luminami and Tatab, and Tatab and Vesperatu, and that's pretty much it. Tatab, everyone knows how good this thing is. It pressures very well its answers with poison and barter boots. It's also one of the better revenge killers because of its strong damage output and great speed tier of 104 if I do recall. So you have a great speed tier, and boots will boost your heavy damage of high base power moves and your awakening ability. It's very self-explanatory. It's very easy to cripple its answers, and it's of course very pressuring with that. Even stuff like Ursnec can't really stay on Tatab a lot because of the sheer damage it does. Other Loomians we do have that haven't changed in the starters are Luminami. Luminami, like I predicted, is going to be used less than Jalusa, and of course Luminami is being less favored on a lot of teams because Jalusa is a lot more consistent for metagame matchups such as Soulburst or Raptodon. As for Seer Knight and Vesperatu, I really debated Vesperatu going up a tier simply because Vesperatu just is still offensively pressuring, and in a metagame where Mutagon is presumed to be in here, it's pretty weird for Vesperatu to not be any higher. However, A- is pretty simple, and of course, if you want to make it chronologically, it's really not. It is Tatab, Luminami, Vesperatu, Seer Knight. That's it. Other than that, let's rank the new stuff. So Zulong, I think I had this in the A tier. However, I'm going to be moving it up to the A+ tier. I think it is still in that higher echelon of tier range simply because of how the metagame has shifted. Zulong mains have now switched over to Chili Chomp, which helps its answers to the likes of Gargoyle Defense and Gasstroke. So if you're running all of the coverages, that makes it very good. You basically only have to resort to Pyrolin, which is less off right now, Ileguana, and that's pretty much it in terms of like the best answers for Zulong. So Zulong right now is making bank. Next up is Himber. Himber did get a buff in Bulk Up, if I do recall. However, I think it has fallen off quite a bit. The metagame, while it's still a metagame where it's Snammy style rules, Himber can't really do much of anything because right now it just gets undersped by a lot of stuff, and no matter how hard you hit, the slower you are, the worse you off. And it's not like you can really compete in a Baffle core team because you have a lot of Loomians like Colossotraps that can just do that role a lot more better. Other than that, we do have Valkyrie, and then Valkyrie I'm going to be raising to the A tier. If I do want to commit to a top 20 Valkyrie pick, then I have to put it in the A tier. I can't just have this exist in the A- tier. Of course, Valkyrie is very versatile. Of course, these starters are very subjected to changing. It's really obvious at this point. However, Valkyrie is still very good. Radiant Forecast sets have pretty much been the main Valkyrie set, just simply because of how much matchups it depends on and helps out with the melee wall breakers like Tatab, Umbrat, Vesperatu, Joltooth, Colossotrops, pretty much anything you can think of that's melee. And of course, the main metagame melee walls, Eurosnack and Obsidian, being weak to Radiant Forecast helps Valkyrie's case a lot out. And of course, it's still as great as a very good ranged wall breaker. Other than this, we do have the rats, and just for the sake of this, Luxor I don't need to explain. Eclipse is going to be falling down a tier to the B plus tier. I do not think it is going any worse. Actually, I'm going to be putting it in the B tier because it can't really break through its answers anymore. So if you look at my older tier lists and you compare the stuff to the B plus tier and what Eclipse is right now, you can see that most of these guys can actually break through their answers somewhat, or they really can't. However, Eclipse doesn't really do that well of a job either. So its only force of utility here is actually just its ability. So I'm just gonna be putting it in the B plus. I really can't see it fall down so far because I know it is still solid. Other than that, I do have to explain Umbrat a bit. Because of the metagame being very shifted to walls that are just weak to light, you have Gastro, Cleone, you have Tatab just being a very good swap in. You got Odiaga, Ferroglyph, Shachi, all just a lot of offensive and defensive stuff that chase down traps very solidly. I'm not even mentioning the light types like Luminami, Jalusa, Valkyrie, all those stuff. They just get trapped in by Umbrat, and that is very solid utility. Unfortunately, it is matchup fishing, so you won't be getting this perfect matchup all the time, so I can't be putting this higher than it actually is. Next up, we do have the Prope evolutions, which I'm just going to be ranking them the same as last time. Nothing really changed much from them. Avatros did get Rogue Assault, which admittedly I was very skeptical on how overhyped it was. I mean, the Speeder Sonic videos, jeez bro, they hyped this thing to an oblivion. Thankfully, no one bought how good this how bad it actually was. But right now, it's still pretty solid. It's still a pretty dangerous sweeper. However, if you're just running the regular balanced semi-stall metacores, Avatros is doing nothing to them. So you can't really give it too much credit there. Next up, we do have the other Loomians here. So Swolder is gonna stay in on viability. We do have Florent still there. I did forget to add a tier from the last tier list, and is that just Soul Burst forms are better. And this is gonna be falling into for Florent here. Florent, and then we have Eruptodon. I don't want to rank Eruptodon because, again, the Soul Burst form is just better. And then you have another Loomian, which I do not actually. Yeah, you do have another Loomian here. It is Gastroke, and Gastroke's right here. These guys, all of their Soul Burst forms are pretty much just better forms of them. There's really no much point into using them. And I can't really put them all in on a viability because they still have some viability like Eruptodon here. And then let's just talk about these real quickly. Soul Burst Florent hasn't really changed much in this meta. This meta is still very, very, very oppressive towards it just because of how much ice type coverage is being thrown around, as well as air coverage and fire coverage. There's not a lot of places it can really run to. However, to the teams that don't have those coverages, this actually is a very strong monster, and I've faced up against this myself. It is quite scary if you do not have it. However, most metagame teams will have answers for this, so it's very easy to just catch this very easily. Next up, we do have Soul Burst Gastroke, which is still going to be is going to drop to the A tier, but being a very high A. Unfortunately, matchup. Actually, no, we're keeping this A+. The main reason why I'm still keeping this up here, despite, Umbrat being here, just being in this metagame, it is matchup fishing, and most teams aren't running Umbrat. And actually, most teams, this is still OU, but even this is still as a threat, it's not oppressive enough to the point where Gastrook has to drop. So this is still going to be relatively mid A tier, sadly not going to be up here at all. And then we have Soulburst Reptidon, which I did heavily underrate in my last tier list, and it's going to be going in the S tier. I do believe that Soulburst Reptidon is probably one of the best Loomians in the entire game, just because of how oppressive this Loomian is. This is one of the most used Loomians in the tournaments that are happening right now. Just looking the meta-analysis usage, it's pretty much top 5 in all of that, and it pretty much forces Jalusa or Cleone on every meta competitive team. You have others like Akalos that people use for Soulburst Reptidon, and even the drop of use Bezeldeus. However, both of those aren't that great right now. Well, mainly the Bezeldeus. Akalos is actually fine, but when you really have to go to show how great this thing is by just forcing so much things onto teams, this is just so good. And Jamie is nerfing this because it's so good, and yeah, it's just a very good Loomian here to use in this metagame. One of the best wall breakers, and of course takes advantage of a very good metagame playstyle, Baffle. There's really not a lot of things you can say bad about this other than its speed tier, which again, Baffle does help out. And then we do have Terrafly, which is gonna stay in unviable. Same for Terraclaw. Terraclaw is staying in its same spot. Ragoon being in B- just because it's Ragoon, and it does have chase down burglar. It does have that viable niche to keep it out unviable. Iguana is also going to be staying in the B+ tier. It has some decent matchups like stopping Valkyrie, Zulong, and Lantorch actually, which is very cool. And Lantorch is a very strong Loomian right now. Also, it does well against Glaciadia. It has decent metagame matchups. However, it is still very weak to a lot of the metagame. For example, it gets in plant types very easily. It forces a lot of dark type coverage is gonna make this hard to actually be using this. However, it is mainly in competition with Jalusa and Cleone, which are just better, arguably better range sponges than this is, and that is the main contention of this right now. Next up, we do have Setamars here, which is still in this B+ tier. Like Iguana, it does have good metagame matchups. However, it does sacrifice the utility from Iguana into having more balanced out bulk, and then of course having AC hitting a lot more harder and arguably a lot more dangerous offensive coverage. So it does benefit from that front. We do have Wiki Wiki, still an unviable. Waka Laka, if I do recall, was also in unviable. However, just for the sakes for Soulburst Icicle, it is going to be a little bit viable, so I'm just going to be putting it in the B-. However, because there's not any slow mind type other than Odiaga that can actually be used in Bane of Haste. So there you go, Waka Laka. You can do that as well. And I'm pretty sure this has access to rallyable personalities, if I do recall. So you can go ahead and use that. Next up, we do have Chartiki, which is going to be in the same realm of Iguana and Setamars. However, I might just lower this down a bit. However, because Pyrolin is just not as preferred as before, you might see this thing pop up a little bit more because of the less competition it now has. Still not being as good as it was before in the previous metas, and still not changing much in viability today. So I think it's going to be perfect in B+. That's perfectly fine. Shachi, I did put it in A tier last year and made it a very solid case to keep it in contention of the A tiers. I still think it's still pretty good at its role. However, just this meta is being very, very bad for it. However, it might not be bad for soon, because Pyrolin being pretty bad, you got Gargolem Defense losing Empathize soon. Jamie has tweeted this, although I don't know if he's gonna stand by his tweet. So when you have the main Shachi answers being down, so you're forced to use Sober's Gastrope, and we all know how easy this is to actually deal with all the dark types roaming around, you can actually see Shachi making a very convincing comeback in this metagame. However, don't be fooled by Shachi not coming back, because obviously Odiaga and Ferroglyph are just going to be a lot better options, so you're going to have to watch out. But Shachi might be making a convincing comeback with pretty much most of its walls are being nerfed, so you do have to watch out. Your soul also is going to be staying in the same here. Actually, I am debating on whether to put this down. Actually, I will, because your soul's main niche, or before its main niche, it was chase down trapping. However, chase down is neutral, so it can't do that anymore. So you're going to have to try and use this as a dark type wall breaker, or just hard hitter in general. You have other options, or not a dark type, it's a spirit type, you know what I mean. You have better melee wall breakers like Halbantic and Joltooth and Glossotrops for Baffle Course, and then you have Vesperatu, which Vesperatu and Ursul have been going ahead for a long time, and then Vesperatu, of course, being better on Ursul for a lot more levels, mainly just in team building and overall just being a lot more placeable on a lot of teams. It is very hard for Ursul to be put anywhere higher in this tier list. It's also unfortunate for Ursul is that priority is kind of not the best at this moment, simply because teams are just so bulky and you don't really benefit much from priority at all, because they are just slower than you most of the time. So it kind of is a problem for, and a conundrum for Ursul here. So I'm just going to be putting it in the B+ tier. However, for its other bear counterpart, everyone knows how good this is. I might just put it in S tier because of how just simply meta defining this Loomian is. I'm going to keep it in S tier for now. I'm just going to see how the top tier just changes for a bit. But if you see my baffle analysis on your snack, you know how good this Loomian is. If you just seen any metagame clip, any competitive games, your snack is always on them. And your snack just supports offense in general so much because of how much it supports the wall breakers. It doesn't need to do damage, because obviously it's a pivot for a reason. It doesn't need to do damage, and other than baffle, it has utility and heartbreak for days, slap down for the item removal. You got shadow sprint for utility, and you even got fade away, so it's not a complete loss when you're up against Dragodon. Your snack pretty much has it all, so I'm going to be putting it in the S tier at this moment. I'm debating on whether or not we'll put this down or not. Really depends. So yeah, actually I'll put Soulbird's Gastrop down here. I really don't think it's in the A+, just simply because of how easy people are now viewing this to be stopping. And then of course I'll be explaining my thoughts as I rank more of the meta stuff that stop Soulbird's Gastrop. You're gonna be seeing a theme in this for quite a bit of here. And then next up we have Obsidian, which admittedly I was pretty harsh on my last tier list. It is definitely not B+. This thing is still very solid. However, not on the same heights as your snack is, just simply because it is still quite reliant on Beast Slumber. It's definitely not the most consistent thing, because Tundulin is just being dependent on a lot more slower teams, so you do have to watch out for that specific thing. So Tundulin mainly giving it some competition, however it's not contributing to the viability of Obsidian at all. The main reason why I'm not putting it up here is because of the Beast Slumber problem, it not being too consistent enough, and because it's not as universal as it is, because your snack is arguably that but better. And for semi-stall teams, Obsidian does work, but Tundulin is another very good option for that contention. Ventation is going to be dropping to unviable again, because we do have other, because I think my main reasoning was burn up made it one of the only Loomians with recovery, not recovery, but Loomians with hazard removal. But we got Cleone, we still have Fiscarna, and like it doesn't have anything else. What does it have over Tundulin, Obsidian, your snack? It has Geyser, but yeah, it has Geyser. That's pretty much Ventation's only argument. And it's not enough to put it up here. Come on, guys. Next up, on a more serious note, we do have Revenant here, which if I do recall, this was on the same tier as Crabtana. Actually, yeah, it was on the same tier. Actually, it was on the B tier, which now looking back at it makes sense. You don't need a Loomian with Vengeance to be a revenge killer. You can just have a regular fast cleaner like Zulong and Tatab. The reason why cleaners are just associated so much with revenge killers is just because they're speed tier. You don't need the vengeance boost to actually revenge kill. You just need natural damage to your output. And when Revenant here is reliant on its ability, it's not a good sign for it because it doesn't mean, because it does, it means you can play around it for one turn. It's not hard to play around the fire, dark, and spirit coverage. Most of those have their resistances, and spirit is for one is immune, so you can play around this very easily. And the main thing with Revenant here is that it requires something to die in order to unlock its power, and that's mainly the whole contention of this Loomian, so I can't put this any higher at all. Then we have Soulburst Krakaloa and Krakaloa itself. Sadly, they're in the B tier, B minus tier. They haven't changed much at all. My mind kind of on Soulburst Krakaloa because semi-stall teams are still very good, although Gasstroke is the most confirmed Soulburst option on those teams. So again, Soulburst Krakaloa, while seemingly good on paper, Soulburst Gasstroke is just the Soulburst on the team. So it's not really the most fun options right here. Vocaloa, although I did say this was better than Arceros, I still believe it's better than Arceros. Although you do have to waste a coverage option for Coconut Bomb to hit plant types, or not to hit water types. What am I saying? But I think this is still in the same tier as it was before. Actually, I put Vocaloa in the B plus tier, so this is in the same tier as it was before. And let me just get this right out of the way before anyone says anything about it. I'm gonna put Arceros in here simply because I think these guys are different enough in their roles to be ranked in the same tier. I don't think they're necessarily Vocaloa is better than Arceros, but Arceros has the wall breaking. Actually, no. Arceros, as much as Boiling Press is through threats to water types like Barblast and Luminami and Jalusa, I think if I've calculated this correctly, Luminami and Barblast are 3-hit KOs to Boiling Press, and Luminami can just pivot out and go into an offensive threat. And as for Barblast actually does get broken if I do recall. However, Arceros is left in significantly low condition. However, if you break a wall, that's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. So I do have to give it credit for that. However, Arceros isn't in the prettiest of speed tiers, especially because you're forced to run Brawny to break through stuff, which is always the best idea. And Novadeus arguably does your job, but even better because of its mixed coverage, and of course, Novadeus has access to Boiling Press. Of course, now that we're talking about Novadeus, I'm gonna get this out of the way. Novadeus, as much as the Coliseum players are talking about Novadeus being high tier, it really isn't. I challenge you to play one tournament and win with Novadeus to get into top 8. There has never been a single Novadeus in the top 8 from any documented tournament since Antlanthian Part 2. So if you want to argue your case for Novadeus being top tier, where is it in tournaments? Other than that, I do have to actually state facts about the Loomian other than its tournament results, because obviously tournament results aren't everything. Ferroglyph hasn't seen tournament results in daylights yet, it's still good. However, Novadeus right here is not the best of Loomians, specifically because of its mixed nature. Mixed Loomians can be very powerful. However, they do have the innate nature of not having enough base stats to actually hit very hard in one stat. And this is perfectly seen with Novadeus, as Novadeus struggles to find a lot of good matchups to where its coverage actually is very threatening. You'd think for a mixed Loomian that you can actually break through clever Loomian, like clever personality Loomians like Serenite or Valkyrie, or maybe in the case of something else like a Luminami. However, Boiling Press or Outburst or whatever melee move you want to run won't be able to stop Luminami, Valkyrie, and Serenite. You also do have concrete answers that are common like Eleguana, and that is very tough for Novidius to begin with, so this alone is just very bad. You also do have Jalusa, which innate just stops this thing very easily. It also does proc Rachel plushie, which isn't good, but I'm just saying it is very tough to use Novidius very correctly, and although it does have some cases where it can be able to sweep, the problem is Obsidian Heart. As good as a damage boost it is, you're going to be boosting the two most consistent ancient type moves on both spectrums. Draco Beam, which -2s after the next turn, so you can't stay in, and then or at least stay in to use a range move, and then Outburst scales on energy. So this is a very hard problem for Novidius. I rest my case, it is not up tier. No matter what your experience with this Loomian is, it does not have the tournament results or the paper to actually be used. Next up, we have Glaciadia, which I will be putting in the A+ tier because I'm going to be comparing it directly to Tatab. I do believe that Tatab is quite a little bit better than Glaciadia simply because it actually can cripple its answers. Glaciadia just got stopped by Valkyrie and Serenite, although they're very hard stops. I do have to say that. However, Glaciadia, unlike Tatab, can't really cripple its answers, and that's where I can't really put it in the S tier. For the S tiers, you gotta be perfect at your role, and both Raptodon and Ursnack do fit that description. Glaciadia can be a really good cleaner, but it can't cripple or threaten sort of its answers. Valkyrie and Serenite, they kind of just exist in front of it. Glaciadia can't really do anything against that. Next up, we do have Vestifer, which I'm just going to be bluntly honest. I'm going to be putting it in unviable simply because Colossotrops is just better than it in every single way in Bane of Haste teams and outside of it. It's just really not good at all. There's not even a case with the regift here. We're not talking about UU or NU Loomians. Next up, we do have the Trumbull, the cow line, and I think they were all in unviable. So I'm just gonna put this real quickly. Mutant doesn't have a lot of going for it. It's just easily walled by a lot of meta cores. Like pretty much every meta core I've mentioned in my defensive core video just stomps on Mewtwo, and those are just Loomian, and those are cores that aren't limited to what and aren't representing the whole meta. It's just that bad. And then finally we do have Gabademic, which is going to be in the B tier because yeah, I've had this last time, although I will be putting it in the B- tier. It's just simply hyper offense is just simply not good, and enchantments, as good as they may seem, they're too inconsistent, and of course people haven't really pushed the limits of enchantments yet. I've seen enchantments based teams, but I've never seen enchantments actually work in the favor of a setup Loomian. Usually people try using enchantments in the early of the game, however that just really is pretty bad because you're trying to sweep in the early game where you can easily be stopped by Driving Force Loomians, by just counters in general. It's really hard to actually use Gabademic as an enchantment lead, and Barbs, we already know who's the better Barbs setter or Barbs lead. If we're talking about strictly suicide leads, we have Gargolem speed. However, even Gargolem speed, not that great in its role, and hyper offense, actually it's good in its role, but hyper offense, not good. And then we had the Soul Burst forms for Icicle. Icicle actually is still pretty solid in its role as just a baffler or a Loomian that just wants to support teams through pivot or just utility with barter and all of that. I think it's still a pretty solid Loomian. I do not think it's in the A- or the B+ tier range as it used to be. However, I will be putting it in the B tier. It's still pretty solid. I think it's quite a side grade to what Bane of Haste Icicle is, so actually I'll be putting these guys in the B+. I think this is fine. And Soulburst Icicle. On paper, and by definition, because it's one of the best in its role, it should be high up. However, saying it's the best in role isn't really saying much because it's a Bane of Haste setter role where it's not a lot of competition, and admittedly Bane of Haste teams are just not going to be getting a lot of progress done because of how bulky teams are at this moment, and due to the nature of most of the Bane of Haste teams just being weak to a lot of ancient and light type Loomians or metal type Loomians, because most of those Loomians have the coverage to hit most of the Bane of Haste teams super effectively, like Colossus Traps, Haganash, and then like the two most common wall breakers on Bane of Haste teams. You can even count Holly Bunch if you're not using Colossus Traps, and then you can have Silbert's Icicle. All of those Loomians can get hit very easily by most of the metagame. And although they'll be outspeeding most of the metagame under a Bane of Haste, therein lies the problem. Once Bane of Haste ends, it's now a complete nightmare because now you're forced to set up Bane of Haste traditionally. Of course, anti-icicle leads are also a thing. Most anti-icicle leads are just pivots, or metal types like Seer Knight, Valkyrie, stuff that can just hit KO or threaten out easily. Light types are very common leads as well, as it can just stop fadeaways, or they can just stop the fadeaway in general through a switch. It's really not that hard to stop Soulburst Icicle leads. What people should be doing is just saving the Frightful Surprise for the end game so they can sweep there. However, that's just my opinion and not the viability for it. It's just going to be in the B+ tier. Then I'm not going to be ranking Pyromine. I'm going to be ranking up Ferroglyph. Ferroglyph, I admittedly ranked it too high. Actually, yeah, I'm still going to be putting it in. Actually, I'm just going to keep it A-. I think it's still perfectly fine in how it's presented. I think it's still a pretty good Loomian in that role. Yeah, I'm going to keep it in A because of how good it is in terms of just breaking through bulkier teams through setup, provoke peace of mind. It's just still very good in that role. And it really isn't challenged other than Odayaga. And I guess I can talk about Odayaga a little bit. It's mainly for more bulkier teams or just teams that just want to have a slower pace but bulkier mind type setup Loomian. Again, provoke peace of mind breaks a lot of actually all ranged walls right now. So your main counterplay to these two is just swapping it to a hard offensive threat that can just threaten these guys out. However, due to these guys' coverage, it is very hard to do that. Most of these stuff, like dark types in general, will be able to just get 2 or 3 hit KO'd, which ultimately isn't optimal. So the opponent will be thinking on their feet when you're up against a smart Odayaga and Ferroglyph players, which is most of the Loomians that are being used by one in competitive scenarios. So these guys on their own are just very solid, very good Loomians. And then let's go over for a blitz round through Sephiroth Loomians, because yes, Garbantis is going to be staying in its same role here. It's still going to be B+. Stratosaur, A-, still stall. Semi-stall is just still very good. Sober Stratosaur is going to be same here. It's a side grade. However, actually, because Pyrelin fell now, you do not have a very solid answer to this. So Sober Stratosaur, only in reality, you got what? You got well, if it's at +2, you got not even, I don't even think Aleguana can actually handle it. You got Sober's Gastroke, you got Cleone. That's pretty much it for meta stuff. Like it's so strong right now. I think I may just put it A+ because of how much Pyrelin fell, and that just makes it so much more better. However, I think that's too much of a high ball right now, so I'm just gonna be putting it in the bottom of A tier. It's just very strong at this moment because Pyrelin fell, so you have Silber's Gastroke and Cleone to deal with it. See, Jamie, this is what happens when you nerf a Loomian that is undeserving of one. Then you got Dyborg, which is going to stay in its same role of B tier. Doesn't have a recovery or is not consistent enough in its role to do so and set up enchantments and all of that. Tyrex is actually a pretty solid wall breaker at right now because Vice Jaws and Power Jaws, as much as amazing as it is, it can actually break through the likes of Snack and Obsi, which is a terrifying thought to say the least. So that just makes it a pretty good case for Tyrex, because you can just force body crashes on your scapegoats, which means they can't fuse it when you're actually vulnerable to the moves. So you can break through these guys, and that's actually quite a scary thought to actually have. I hope I do not fight a Power Jaws Tyrex. However, the whole thing of the argument is you can just swap in an offensive threat. It's still quite slow, so it's still very revenge killable. So I think it's still perfectly fine here. Although putting it on the same tier as Himber is kind of pushing it for me. So I think I'm gonna put Himber down here, because Himber is a lot worse than what's all in B plus tier. And then we have Munchwheel, same story, it's just gonna stay in on viability. Because Rev Up is not good. We have Avatros now, which is just miles better than it. And specialization, we have Metatoad for that. So there you go. And then you have Gardrone. Again, Gardrone unviable. Clutch Accelerate is a niche. It is something. However, again, early game sweeping never works, and late game sweeping with a clutch Gardrone, you might as well just use a Sweeper or a Cleaner that are just built better for the metagame and don't need hard setup to actually do their jobs. And then as for other stuff, we got Hunter here. Hunter has actually risen quite a lot. I'm not sure if I'm ready to put this in the A tier. However, I'll be putting it pretty mid tier for the A minus tier. It's definitely pretty solid because of Vice Jaws being pretty good. It actually does have the potential to outright just do well against the likes of Obsi, Yursnack, Tongilin, Seer Knight, even though they do have the power to just stop it and wall it. Hunter can play around it with, and the team of course, with Vice Jaws, and that can prove for some pretty clever counterplay for the Hunter users. So I may put this up in the A tier. I'm just debating on whether or not I see it from the rest of the tier list. Then we do have Arapago. Again, Arapago is another Loomian. I'm not putting it on viable because it is still having the same niches that it does have before, being a fast, bulky water type with the threatening coverage. So it's not doing well against semi-stall teams because it doesn't hit hard at all. However, against offensive teams, it might prove to be some use because it actually does have the coverage to hit through and KO frail Loomians, so it actually does have that power. However, it's not too great enough to actually warrant to use over these Loomians. And then now we're done with that, let's rank the fossils. The fossils are all going to be very self-explanatory. And then Colossotrops, I don't know where Colossotrops is on here, so here it is. It's just with Deldrix for some reason, but Colossotrops, let's rank the best, or one of the better ones out of the fossil Loomians, and then Joltooth as well. Joltooth, I admittedly am thinking it's quite a bit worse than I initially thought, because after using it, it's just a lot more easier to use melee walls or melee wall breakers that aren't this, like Halvantic and Totab. However, the fact that it's still very threatening with the Drudge, Earthquake, and all of that, I do think it's gonna still be in the same tier around that as it was. And then we have I'm blanking. And then we have Colossotrops here, still very good. Baffle Cores are still a very common thing, although not as being used as much as before because Totsab or Nevermare is just being used over it on more of these Baffle Core teams, because you don't really need Colossotrops here on here. You can just have a Eruptodon, and that kind of just does everything you really need it to do. However, it's still pretty solid in of where it is. Infernix is pretty alright. I think it's still pretty high on depending on the B tiers, because stall and semi-stall teams are still pretty good, and Infernix can still utilize itself on there with the Power Napper course. And of course, I think Jamie's considering buffing this thing. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but actually that was just a rumor. I don't know what I'm yapping about. That Joshua Star started something that made it so people think we're gonna give it Zip Zap, and I don't really know why, but yeah. And then Skellig, same tier as it was before, and same goes for the Rogo. I'm actually gonna put it down a tier because +2 Draco Beam is definitely a very big threat. However, the fact that it probably needs to have, actually no, I can't really justify it putting it lower. I think it's still B+ tier. And then as for Skellig here, there's just a lot more better judge users and offensive waters in this metagame right now. Next up, we do have Malmerk, Barblast, the routes here, and then I'll go over them all pretty quickly. Deldrix here, I did rank it A-, however I'm gonna put it down here simply because of its effectiveness isn't as great as it was before, because you have Dokomori and Sober's Gasstroke, which both of them combined just are used completely by the entire metagame. Your Snack and Gargoyle Defense also play around this thing very well, and as a offensive water, it is not being preferred over the likes of Jalusa, and that is a pretty hard reality for Deldrix players to face. And Boots users, in terms of Deldrix's competition, you have Tatab, which is just so much better, and that's a pretty big issue for that, so I can't really rank this any higher. Barblast again, or not, Blowtox again, unviable, because Barblast is just better. Any situation where Blowtox is in and it does good, Barblast will just do it better. Barblast again, I'm not going to be putting it in B+ or B where other people are putting it. I think it's still a solid contention of the A tiers. It has more niches on semi or semi-stall or stall teams, simply because it does have the consistency over Obsidian, and Obsidian doesn't have the synergy of Barblast and Tondulin, because those two pretty much wall almost all melee attackers in this game, and that is very strong synergy and something very warrant using. Of course, this also performs a little bit well on more balanced offense style teams. However, just know that the bulky water type is going to be challenged heavily by Jalusa and Cleone, so you most likely won't be able to use that, and that's where its argument stops for it going any higher. And then Garlash here. Garlash is going to be in the same tier as it was before. Not really a lot of things to actually justify using this. Metatoad is going to drop from A to the A-. I definitely think it's still a pretty good specs user. However, the fact of the matter is, you got a lot better wall breakers right now that can just hit so much harder and aren't reliant on niche recovery. Not niche recovery, niche coverage. As for Malmerk, Malmerk is still also going to be in the same realm here of B-. The metagame has a lot of coverage against it, so it doesn't have the room to actually thrive. It can just only survive, and it doesn't really have a lot of metagame matchups where you would rather use this over another ranged wall like Cleone, or in this case, this versus Solber's Gasstroke, because they're both ranged wall plant types. Other than that, we do have Haganash, which finally, it's out of the unviable tier. I'm so happy that this got Battle Chime, because now it's pretty solid as a Bane of Haste sweeper or wall breaker, because Battle Chime is hella scary. However, it's still being reliant on a very niche playstyle, so I can't really give it too much props for that. And then we have the to finish this part of the event of the Sweet Retreat. Got Mocho here, and God, no, I don't even want to think about this Loomian. Mocho's still gonna be in the unviable tier, because actually yeah, it's gonna drop down to the unviable tier because it just doesn't have any niches anymore. Glishadia and Wintrix, or mostly Glishadia, not really Wintrix, but you get the point. Just outclass anything it can actually do in this metagame. Spreezy, I did say it was a little bit alright, however, it is just barely hanging on in this metagame. It's just really hard to justify using this over any other bug type, or bug types in general. Your main competition is Garbantus, and it just has better metagame matchups against you. And of course, Soul Burst Florent is arguably better, however, it does take up a Soul Burst form. And then we have Whipple Drift, which is decently threatening, however, it's still quite not the best because of its coverage still not being as threatening. And of course, needing to get a glide boost to actually sweep is quite hard to actually do because you have to use the move first and you have to hope to use it on a swap or use it on a good matchup. So that hard for sweeping is pretty hard to use. If it did get rev up or something like that, I'd consider moving it up to the higher Avalanche. And we have the Vari evolutions here. The Varis, not really, most of them really didn't change much. We can have unviable for Hydrolan. I don't think anyone actually cares. Then we got Buzzlin. Buzzlin didn't get to any buffs because it didn't even get a stab upgrade. I was wrong on that Venom Slash thing. So Buzzlin, still the same tier as it was before. Carolyn, oh my gosh, the Joshua Star Glaze on Carolyn is actually insane. It got sharpened and now suddenly, oh my god, it can hit all of its attacks. But everyone seems to forget that we have existing melee wall breakers that can just do what it does, however, do it a lot more better, and it doesn't need a freaking sharpen to do it. It's also a lot frailer and it's slower, so it's gonna have a lot harder time to swap in. And while Baffle is a thing, Baffle can support things that aren't so desperately are needed for it. So Carolyn B is gonna be the best. I'll go for it, not B+. And then we have Hirelin here, which, as much as the Hirelin haters are gonna freaking hate me for this, I think it's still viable. Hirelin still has the matchups that it still needs to be helping for, as Glishadia, maybe Soulburst Gas, not Soulburst Gastroke, Soulburst Stratosaur for a little bit. Magnify is very hard waters for this, but we can survive with Fanning Flame and Very Clever. We can survive. And then, so it has still the niche matchups. It's still as splashable as it is. Not still as splashable, because Jamie still can't really find out what another way to actually make this better. It really wasn't as good as here. It was never here. It was always down here. But because it did get quite a heavy nerf, I am gonna have to put it in a B+ tier. Now Jamie will reap the consequences where Soulburst Stratosaur will just rule the metagame. Glishadia will just be a lot more better, and then Lantorch will just ruin everything. Can't wait for that to happen. Wrestling, though, on a more lighter note, is a lot more better. Because of its more newfound coverage, it can now hit a lot more safer without having Rogue Assault just dropping its defenses and then dying the next turn. So there you go for the wrestling enjoyers. Also, notice how all these Varis are male. And then for Tundrelin, I don't know why I said that. Tundrelin here is good. If I'm gonna put Barblast up high, I might as well put Tundrelin on the same tier as it. It's just a little bit better than it. But Tundrelin here is still quite good. The main contention for Tundrelin here is because it has the matchup spread over Joltooth and Colostrops that Barblast or Obsidian or Ursnack can get. It's also just a lot more consistent in what it can do. You have Vendolin, which honestly didn't help much. Mudslide didn't really help all that well. It's like a nice stab upgrade, but Mud Spatter still has a speed control, so you really have to choose whether or not you want to run Mudslide. Wendelin here, still the same tier as it has. I did put it in the A-, however, after playing this, I do realize that I was glazing it a little bit, It's really easy to play around this thing if you know what you're doing, because most Gwendolins are just going to be based off of fadeaways and then slight mega chomps here and there. And of course, fadeaways and mega chomps can't stop the hard walls that wall it, and that's pretty much everything that are melee wall oriented besides your snack. And what's worse for Wendolin's case is that actually Wendolin is, I think Wendolin is still in the A-. It's just very low on that spectrum and slightly above B+. Because if we're gonna, yeah, I can't actually put this over Sober's Icicle. I really can't. Yeah, it's just gonna stay there. Okay, so I do have to justify this though. Like, the main contention for Wendolin is that it's kind of too slow to do any sort of thing. It can run boots, yes. However, there are just much more better boots users, and Vesperatu is overall a lot more consistent of an offensive spirit type. Same goes for anything with dark coverage related like Umbrat and Hunter. It can just do what Wendolin can, but a lot more consistently. And although it does support like the funny boots Wendel Lusa core, it's really not all that deep. Because when Jalusa can't really hit the hardest, and Wendolin here is really reliant on its matchups. And most semi-stall teams, it only can dance around them a little bit. It can't really provide any meaningful chip. And then for Zeppelin, I think, what did Zeppelin get? I get perched, but it's most likely just going to be using peace of mind and provoke, because perch really isn't all that needed. So it's just going to stay at B. Servalin is going to be an unviable. And then let's run through the event winners. So the best event winner here is going to be a little bit by a long shot, but it's going to be Harvesect. Harvesect is going to be the better one here. After using it and just my overall thoughts on this, it is a lot better than people give it credit for. Very robust, or brawny robust. Chanks decently well for a lot of the metagame. It actually provides itself as a really good check and stop to the likes of Hunter, Vesperatu, Tatab, Jolttooth, and all of that. Although you do have to watch out very carefully for what you're trying to do for swapping into those coverage moves. However, the main thing here, it kind of does get stomped on easily by ice and air types. Speaking like Sober Stratosaur, Glaciadia, Odayaga, and all of that. So it does have those problems there. And Life Force, of course, you're forced to run Health Amulet to offset that. And of course, you're not gaining any HP with the Life Force offsetting the Health Amulet. And that's actually pretty bad for Harvesect. So I can't really put it too high because it's not consistent enough. So here we go. Wintrix is also gonna fall down to the B tier, and same goes for Oxydrake. I think it's still a pretty solid Loomian. Barb's driving force, as memed as it is on for, because it's not the first one to do it, it's still a pretty solid Loomian at that role. It's just this metagame matchups like Sober Strat, Glaciadia, it still has those matchups, hasn't went away. Wintrix, it's still gonna further fall because Glaciadia is just so much better. In fact, this was supposed to be in B tier. I do not know why I put it in B+ last time. And then let's go over the rest of the, actually let's go over the Loathsome Beach ones. And we got Tsugoop, Tsukame, a Samarine, I don't know, Banfino, and then Banfino, and then Lumella. Anyways, Lumella. You're gonna put there. You literally gained much all of viability at all, and Banfino, same thing as you. You didn't gain any much of worthy support either. Your role hasn't changed of the only sub-seed user in OU. Samarine also didn't change much. Fadeaway is certainly useful for bouncing off your checks. However, I haven't seen any sort of Samarine to utilize that to their fullest potential. nor have I. It kind of just functions as a regular offensive Loomian that can just pivot off of stuff. However, it can't really do it to the effect of something like a Boots Wendelin can, because it doesn't have the speed tier. However, it's a rev up user that is very strong in the late game, so I can't really dock it much points for that. So it's still going to be quite strong. C.B.O, also quite strong. Didn't gain anything in terms of counters at all, so it still has that ambush niche. We have Tsukame, which again didn't gain any niches at all, still being one of the bottom tier viable water types, not the unviable ones. And then Sagoop didn't change much at all either. Didn't gain anything new, didn't gain any new metagame matchups, any sort of that. It's just B tier. Still pretty solid, but nothing worth noting. And then we got Jalusa here because, oh yeah, it was released as a Loomian in Antlanthian City Part 1. Let's just go over all the Antlanthian City Part 1 Loomians right here. Cleone and Jalusa. Both of these Loomians are, at least for Cleone, not Jalusa, it's going to go in the A tier. Really nothing much has changed, only more has been discovered. It can provide itself as, it's still very versatile in what it can do. It can hard hit with stratagem, it always has been. It can do gust setups, which is pretty good for teams without hazard removal. It can pivot out with dissipate, it has rejuvenate, it can have peace of mind wars, it has a lot of metagame matchups, specifically Soulburst or Raptidon, which is very solid for that. So props to Cleone. However, Jalusa has risen to the A+ tier, and I was alluding it to my last tier list. However, Jalusa at its core is undeniably one of the strongest Loomians in the game, simply because it sets up on anything ranged ball or range oriented that isn't, yeah, not much there. It can set up on anything ranged attacking, assuming it's on a swap at the safest. You can even set up in front of it if you really want to, depending on the Loomian. That is just a very strong attribute to have. Not to mention, it has the best matchups against the likes of Soulburst Raptidon, so there you go. And also, because it can set up on a lot of stuff, specifically range attackers, it provides the team as a pretty solid check to any range attackers that you can't cover. So that makes Jalusa a really good Loomian. Definitely probably one of the best Loomians in the entire game. I don't know why I ranked this low on my last tier, on my top 20 video. There you go. Jeez. Boonery didn't gain much in terms of viability, although replicating and being faster by any Soulburst or Raptidon form is genuinely very terrifying. Although you really have to question that matchup. Actually, other than that, you also do have other important matchups like Velocitrops being infinitely fast with like a Boots on top of your... I don't think it replicates the status, so I can't really use that example. But a lot of melee, there's a lot of meta wall breakers that just hit very hard for Boonery to take advantage. So I think it's gonna get a slight upgrade in tiers, just not too much because it's gonna be in the bottom of B+. And then you got Taoshinu, and then Lyricat, which are both gonna stay in the same tiers as it was in B- because they didn't get anything new, no new metagame matchups, so nothing new to talk about for them. And then Sunoger, again, unviable because Charonix exists with Spite and is so much better than it in every single way. Then we have the part 2 of the Sweet Retreat of these guys, which is actually surprisingly low. I thought there's a lot more of these Sweet Retreat Loomians. Anyways, oh yeah, because Pharrell's up here. We have Fiskharna, and Fiskharna is still the same viability as it was. I do want to talk about this a little bit more because Soulburst Raptidon has made it so this is used quite a little bit more. So you can go credit this, and that pretty much all it can really do. He can't really use this thing much over than something like Cleone or Jalusa, simply because it doesn't have the reliable recovery enough, and of course its coverage isn't nearly as threatening as both of them. Cedric, after using this, I am almost so close to putting this in unviable, bro. This thing has screwed my matches in so much, and I'm just gonna say this: the damage output that I thought it could do with thistles, with what? With Thorn Slam, with a +1, thought it was a +2, but it was actually a +1, which changed my perspective on this entirely. I thought this was like the second coming of Tata, but it really wasn't. It was just a slow, reliant on boots, not reliant on boots, you can really do what you want with it. Loomian that's reliant on Thorn Slam anomalies, which is not good at all. Even with +1, it doesn't do nearly enough damage to secure you victories. And then we have Baneki next. Same story goes for this. This is still the same viability as it was before, although probably going to be a little bit lower than last time, depending on how I feel about this placement. Yeah, I'm going to put this down here as well. Like, the main reasoning I'm trying to see here is how relatively this tier list is ranked, because it's really tough for me to put Baneki over something like the Soul Burst forms of Krakaloa, and then Krakaloa itself, Cedric, stuff like that. It's really tough for me to see where I can really rank this thing, although in the end B- is just going to be a full place of unwanted Loomians that are not unviable, but they're just there. And then next up we have the 2023 event, 2022 Halloween event Loomians, which is just these two, because I think, yeah, these two. Unless I'm missing something here, no. And then Halvantic here is pretty good. Oh yeah, we do have Nevermare, but Nevermare's on the Uber section. Not Ubers. It's on the Roamer section. Halvantic is still a pretty solid Loomian. Nothing really changed much about it. So therefore, I'm going to keep it in the A tier. Still, I don't know, A-. Still a pretty solid Loomian. Not really much I can really talk about it, because it's just way too solid. Not really much I can say, so A-, there you go. As for Imperior still hasn't got that resentful nerf, so it's still A tier. I really want this thing to get the resentful nerf, because it's not used a lot, but it's still really terrifying, because you have to really second guess yourself whenever you're up against it. And then we have the two 2022 Christmas Loomians that are here. And then Holly Bunch is not in the depths of B- anymore. It's gonna be in B tier, along with his buddy old pal Haganash, just for the fact that they're riding along the Soulburst Icicle Band of Haste train. And then you got Barbadger here, didn't really change much at all. It's still A-, although I might clean up the tiers and make another extra tier, put down C+, so it's officially. However, I don't really see the use right now. Then we have Dragonin, which is going to be quite the Loomian to rank. Let me just put the weather Loomians that we have so far, and then we can have Sherbot. For some reason this was added, and then Lumala, and then Weaslin. So before we can get to the Antlanthian City Loomians, Dragonin, as high as I do want to put this thing, I think I'm gonna put it at A tier minimum. Dragonin here is still a very good Loomian. I don't know why people keep thinking it's bad. Like, people say that Pyrelin can stop this thing, although not with the Pyrelin nerfs. You're really forced to resort to using Wobblisk if you really want to, although it's not really the greatest in this metagame, so you're mainly forced into using Seer Knight, which, in case you guys don't know, is nearly not enough to break through Dragonin. Peace of Mind and Provoke is just so good for a lot of teams, and the fact that Dragonin also provides itself as a pretty good check and hard check to the stuff like Your Soul, Your Soul, Umbrat, and Vesperatu, which admittedly is pretty hard to stop when you're not forcing yourself to run every single melee wall in the game. That's just very good for the fact for Dragadan. And of course, it supports offense in a very good way by breaking through semi-stall and stall. It's just a pretty good stall breaker in general. And for the fact that this meta is oriented around that, we're going to be putting it in A tier. Just very solid all around. And then finally, the final S tier that I'll be putting maybe right now, I really don't know later, is Charonix. And Charonix is just very strong right now because the fact that Charonix is really it's still really strong. There's still not a lot of ways to stop it. You still only have Valkyrie and Sirna. I don't know why Jamie has made a dedicated Loomian to stopping this yet. Although that's pretty bad game design. However, I'm pretty surprised Jamie hasn't tried an attempt to stopping this yet. He still hasn't removed Light Speed Ray. However, this thing has it all. It can revenge kill offensive Loomians, offensive Charonix, can just sweep through offensive and defensive teams. It has the defensive capabilities to be a pretty good defensive monster and supportive Loomian with Gust, Flash and Flee, Spite, all of that jazz. You guys already know. And then, other than that, we have Billforge, which is also going to go in the B tier along with Haganash. Although the fact of the matter is, this is a lot worse than Haganash in terms of Bane of Haste teams, so I can't really put it on the same tier. So B- to go. And then Weaslin here. Weaslin also B-. Jeez. I don't know why Joshua Star has put this guy so high. But you do have to realize that this guy can't stop anything from removing hazards off the field. This guy just has to face that, oh, here is 2 hazards down. Oh, I'm dead. Let me look at what happens the next turn after what happens after the battle. Oh, my hazards are gone. Oh my gosh, I just wasted all my time spending those up. Now they're gone. Yay. What about anti-hazard leads? Well, in case you don't know, the other 2 hazard leads, Gobdemic and Gargoyle Defense, they're down here. They're not used. Why would they're not used? They're bad. Why would you ever use this in the S tier? Tell me, and I would like to know. Gosh, I don't even want to talk about these 2, although I'm gonna have to. Lumala is not unviable simply because it actually can hit quite hard with the shell and spit out, so you have that niche. And then Surebot here is gonna go in unviable because same thing like Mocho, pretty much any ice and metal type just completely outclass what it does, and it's obviously not that hard to wall either. Then we have the the Antlanthian City Part 2 Wild Loomians. This is going to be quite a long section because there are so much of these guys. However, thankfully, these guys are mostly stay the same in viability with an exception of few of them, so I will be going over them. So, Shrimpas still unviable, didn't gain anything new. I don't know why Jamie didn't do anything but decided to nerf Pyrelin, but that's besides me. And then you got Dokomori, which is going to stay in the A- just for the fact that it can stop a lot of, it's like the anti-Loomian for anti-meta because it's a pretty good stop to the likes of Jalusa, not Jalusa, what am I saying, for Dakuda and then Soulburst Dakuda, which is very strong and not a lot of stuff can actually stop it. So it's for that. It's like a worse year snack in terms of baffle stuff. However, it does support teams with Icicle Traps, which is another good way of stopping the likes of Soulburst, Gasstroke, Nevermere, Colossal Traps, any plant type in general. So you can also use that as well. It is not quite the monster because it's not hitting hard at all because it's a defensive pivot, but I can see where people are coming from. So I think it's still a pretty solid Loomian. It's another defensive pivot that supports offensive wall breakers. We like those. However, your snack Can't put it much higher because your snack belongs in that role. Then we have Pransu, which is going to be in the B tier again. Actually, I'm going to put this down here. Do I really want to? Actually, no. Because it's like comparing like a rock to another rock. Like you're trying to see which one rock is better, but at the end of the day, you already know these guys are just gonna accomplish the same thing, which makes me feel like that it's gonna be down here. So Shrimpas or no, Pransu gonna be there, and it's getting quite cluttered here. So I think I'm gonna be making a B mine a C plus tier. It's finally time that I make a C plus tier. I think it's finally time, guys. So for the Loomians, so I think I'm gonna put in a C plus the Loomians that have no niches. Teams have a little niches, but they're just bad. And then let me just actually Spreezy's. Spreezy's not that definition. Then we got this. It's looking a little bit better. There's not a lot of bad Loomians. Oh wait, I forgot to put that there. And then Waka Laka, yeah. And then Lumelo. Lumelo's actually no. Lumelo's not down here. There we go. Yeah, that actually looks better. It's a little bit better. Alright. Now, let's move on to the other Loomians. I kind of got sidetracked. And then let's go off with Crabtana. Gonna stay the same. Drudge, user that has Razor Sharp. Cool. Vengeance user. Again, they rely on Vengeance. Don't use Vengeance. I don't know why I need to repeat myself with this one. Because, actually, in terms of Vengeance matchups, it does have the positives of having your snack the only one to stop, and then Tangerine Obsidian being the only ones that can't hit. However, the fact that Metal isn't really that hard of a typing to fend off with, and first of all, because most teams have fire types, it's really not that hard to actually stop it. In competitive wise anyway, Coliseum may be a different scenario, but Boots, Crabtana, Vengeance, I can't really put it higher than what Revenine is, because that's just discrediting the whole idea of what I was trying to present. It's just going to stay here because of Drudge and Razor Sharp. Next up, we have Mariel, which I did put in the B plus here. However, I will be moving this down a bit just because of how inconsistent this Loomian is. I was admittedly pretty much just undeniably glazing this thing, because its speed tier really just speaks volumes of how much this really needs the speed buff, because you really can't use this Loomian without Bane of Haste, and even on Bane of Haste it's kind of bad because it doesn't hit the hardest, but it does hit hard actually, so you can't use it there. My main issue is that its speed tier is so bad that you pretty much lose any scenario where you would win if you were faster, because you do hit hard, you have the coverage. However, you just do not have the speed tier. And of course, that also extends to your defense and typing, being weak to a lot of the metagame typings like light, electric, light, earth, all of that, fire, or water. I'm going on and on, but you see my point. And same things goes for Pterodescent. Pterodescent also was overhyped a lot. Drudge, bulky Drudge user, yay, another one. However, it's really not all that special because metal types are very common in this metagame. And that really makes it Pterodescent not really the best, because unless it gets coverage for those metal types, it's not going to be looking great anytime soon. And then we have the rest of the Event Loomians, which is going to be a slog to go through because they're kind of unordered. Really depends on how you look at it, but yeah. So let me just lump the Christmas events together, because I think that's the best way to go about it. And then first off, we got Wraith, which I did put in the A- tier. However, I will be putting it in the B+ tier. After using it, its melee defense weakness is really a bad weakness to have, and of course, Loomian with no recovery pretty much resorted to just a baffle user. As much as Wraith is designed to do to stay in and shatter up some barbs and damage, because that's what the move is for, you cannot really staying in on a lot of time and not really clicking shatter at all, because you're mostly just going to be clicking baffle and supporting your offensive teammates, which is what you're supposed to do. However, what sucks for Wraith is the fact that it really can't accomplish that when it's always going to be getting chipped hard. It can stop threats like Miscellaneous and all of that because it does have the meta mashups. However, this also does suffer from the lack of no recovery, so it can't really put this any higher than it really can. Same goes for Thamin and Lashent. Lashent and Thamin. Lashent I may give credit for because it can be ran deep, like bulky for some reason, because for some reason Jamie made that a thing. However, more seriously, these guys can't really do much because one, at least for Thamin, it's very reliant on its ability, and again, using an inconsistent and a niche cleaner, while you can use another very common and just better cleaner in general that is more consistent, like Zulong, Glishadia, Tatab, Nevermare, all of that. Why would you use them? Why would you use Thamin over them? Because once its health goes below 50, it's pretty much not doing anything the rest of the match. Then we have Leshent. Leshent, more of the same story, except Baffle is just, or not Baffle, ambush users are much more taken seriously than the ambush users above it. And then we have Gienta here, which Gienta I am debating on putting it in the A tier. However, yeah, I'll just put it here because it is just pretty solid in what its role it can really do. It's just a solid cleaner, really nothing more else to it. It's just really solid in that role. Because it really forces stuff like Jolusa on there, terrifying Seer Knights, Valkyries on occasions. It can play around it if it really wants to. Luminami, you can really do what you really want against it. It's not a lot of answers to Gienta, and for that reason, it's just very solid all around. And then we have Krambos here, which Krambos is going to go in the B+ tier. As much as people would say, oh my gosh, it cannot one-shot with Battle Chime anymore. So now Jamie buffed it Ravenous, although it really wasn't necessary. That's aside the point. The fact that Battle Chime is such a risky move to click because the opponent can quickly just go into an offensive threat and just kill you off straight away, or just priority users, but they're not really that common. And that's really a big problem for Krambos. However, the other issue for Krambos is the fact that it can only use it once other than Milkshake. However, expending Milkshake on a Loomian like this is not really the greatest thing because it's only a wall breaker. You might as well use it on a more defensive oriented Loomian that needs that recovery. So for that reason, it's going to be in the B+ tier. It's still pretty solid, however, definitely nothing more consistent in the higher tiers. And then finally, let's go over the Yokai Loomians, which is finally something interesting to talk about. But warn, no, you're not getting anything to say. You're just gonna get slapped to B- because you have a slight niche with Perish Song, and that's all you really have. But that's not really anything else. And then you have Rancidor and then Lead Torch. But first off, let's talk about the worst out of this three. I do believe is Parasol. Parasol. The main issue with Parasol here is that, or Parasol, I'm just going to call it that, is that it really isn't, there's not a lot of reason to justify using this thing over any other dark type. Umbrat, Vesperatu, they just do so much better in their offensive roles. And as for Dragaden, it's just a much better, bulkier dark type. As for bulky water types, there's also no competition. Cleone, Delusil, Luminami, it's there. They're all there. And in the metagame where those don't even exist, it's really hard to use Parasol even because a lot of its offensive matchups are easily be exploited because Parasol He really is weak to a lot of them, and that is not that great. Other than that, Rancidor is gonna be in the B tier as actually. I'm really debating on here because Rancidor is actually quite strong after a setup of Peace of Mind. You really just have to get this thing going. However, again, why use this when you can use an offensive cleaner that can just do that job but much more better? You also got more better examples of Peace of Mind Loomians that can just hit hard after one, like Glushadia and Jalusa, so I can't really give this too much credit. However, I still think B plus is the minimum. I really need to test this out a lot more to actually garner my thoughts on this, so I do have to know for that specific reason. And yeah, and Landtorch. Landtorch I did say I think was going to be a pretty underwhelming threat. However, oh my gosh, bro, do or die or wildfire. Oh my god, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die against this Loomian, bro. 140 base power being boosted by do or die and stab. You gotta be kidding me. I do not want to put a frickin' Jalusa on all of my teams. I'm already struggling enough by depriving myself of a frickin' Gargoyle defense. But the fact of the matter is, if you do not have a Jalusa, you are basically fricked, because if you want to use a Cleone, if you want to use a Cleone for this, you got Fade Away. You got Luminami, other than Jalusa, you got Luminami. That's it. Valkyrie gets 3 KO, then it's not even a competition, bro. It is so hard to actually be utilizing this. And then that's basically it. You got Iguana, but let's be real, who's gonna be using Iguana over this? Iguana is not that common. So Landtorch, yeah, Iguana is UU right now. So Iguana really can't compare it to Landtorch here, and Landtorch is just so strong. See, this is what happens when you nerf bad. Actually, Pyroland doesn't do much to it, but that was for another example, like Soulburst Stratosaur. But yeah, oh my gosh, bro, Landtorch is so scary. Like, teams run this Loomian just because it's so good and it's so hard, but I'm not even kidding. Like, you're forced to run Jalusa or Luminami. If you do not have either of these, you're just gonna get flared to death. You're just gonna get flared to death, and you can't even use plant types because it can just hit those. And as for Solar's Gastroc Fade Away, I'm just rambling at this point. I'm just rambling. It's late. I'm just rambling. Okay, and then let's just get. Other than that, Landtorch is just so good. I don't think it's quite S tier yet, because again, Boots users can revenge kill, although Landtorch running Boots is just the ultimate option, because if I do recall, Landtorch does have a higher base speed than most Boots users. Let me check real quick. Landtorch, if I do recall, no, Landtorch only has 93 base speed, so Landtorch can get outsped by Tatab. Boots Jalusa doesn't work, but you get the point. Boots Tatab does outspeed Landtorch, so for the reason that it still can get revenge killed, even with the boot set, you can choose to run it. It really doesn't care, but the boot set is the most common set. It's gonna be get revenge killable. I don't think it's gonna be up here just because Soulbursts are up to done. I gotta admit, it's still a lot more better than what Landtorch can really give. However, the argument for S tier is definitely there, so I won't blame someone for putting this in the S tier. It really all just depends on the metagame matchups at the end of the day. And then next up we have the roamers, which is quite a long list. Let's start off with the small chunks with the Casimir forms. Casimir forms, I feel like I say this every time with these guys. This guy's here, this guy's here, and this guy's here. Just for the reason that stall is good, so Encase is good. This is good because setup is really strong. However, metal types exist, so it can't be too high. And then this guy is good because of Surrogate and Spec Meteor. However, metal types exist, so I can't put this too high, and it's too Vanish. We also got other abilities like Obsidian Heart. Obsidian Heart, Awakening, Ace is now a viable strategy. Yeah, go Cosmere Unleashed. We love this. I really don't know what else to say because it's pretty much all dumbed down to that. There's not a lot of metagame matchups that I would really say that has been benefited at all, although you can really choose to see what you want to believe in this game. And then next up we have the regular roamers. Let me just go through them. The story mode roamers. So we got Dusket, Protagon, Ikazune, and then the Kuhudas. Alright, let's go over the worst of them, Dusket and Protagon. Both of them still being in B tier. I don't want to put Dusket any higher simply because Poison Barb's Mean Spirited hasn't been tested out yet, so I will be testing that out eventually. However, the practicality of it isn't really seeming that great, and most teams are probably going to be having some form of easy hazard removal like your Golem Defense. And as for Protagon, actually I will be putting Dusket a little down here. Actually no, I'll just keep it same here. Really no difference. As for Protagon here, Analyze can't really work enough to its favor, and the fact that while yes you can adapt to the melee attack boost, you don't have the coverage enough to do so. However, once it gets more coverage, if I do recall it, only Steel Crusher is its best form of melee coverage, so once it does get more, then that's a dub for Protagon. And then as for Ikazune is also it's also not A- anymore or A tier anymore. It's going to be in the B+ tier. However, I can't see the Surgeons back into viability because Pyrelin is off the planet, so your only really form of worries is Dokomori and then Soulburst Gasstroke. Once it's transformed, pre-transformed, it's game. Game is game. But again, Ikazune here, it's really hard to justify using this over the fire types right now. You want a better wall breaker, you got Soulburst Raptidon, want a better cleaner. With boots users, you got Lantorch. So it's really kind of hard to justify using Ikazune right now. So I might even put this in B because it really doesn't have a lot of niches over these guys. Although it's better than a lot of the Loomians in B tier. So it's gonna be in B+. And then we have the I dread ranking these Loomians because I'm gonna put them together and people are gonna say, oh my gosh, Soulburst Dakuda is an A tier. I have to use Soulburst. No, I have to put like a big disclaimer here that this as a concept. Okay, actually I'm gonna put my own tier here just so people as a concept, as a Coke set. I'm not gonna care actually. As a concept, these guys are both A tier because if you're using a mixed Dakuda like I've alluded to in my top 20s video, you're gonna provide yourself with a lot of results because mixed Dakudas, specifically with the Soulburst form, using your base form until you need to transform is very solid. Provides itself as a pretty good counterplay and mix up and mind games on the opponent, all of that stuff. Not to mention that Dakudas are just very strong in this metagame, is because Soulburst Gasstroke, unless you're running Slapdown, is going to be one of your answers. And then you got Dokomori, which isn't being used a lot. And then, actually it's still being OU, but then again, it's still not the most common thing in the world. And then other than that, you have your Snack, which surprisingly Gamma Plus doesn't work too well for, but the option is there. So again, you say to yourself again, this is looking very strong for Dakuda and its Soulburst form. In my opinion, I think it actually might be a very well case for A+. However, I'm just gonna keep it in A tier because it does have the problems of Soulburst being too slow and then regular form being too frail to actually stay in for most of the time, mostly being relegated to Baffle Center teams. If you do not have Baffle against these guys, with these guys I mean, it's going to be very hard to use them. And then other than that, let's go over these guys. I will be ranking LFH here because it's pretty similar. Actually, no I won't. It's pretty similar to how things will be playing around. And then let's just rank these guys. I'll save the Gargolem forms for last. Where is Gargolem? Oh, it's already ranked. And then, yeah, and I'll save the Christmas for the end. So, let's talk with the Mare. No, the Wobblisk and the Mare. They're both pretty decent still. They both haven't changed in viability all too much. Although Wobblisk still has a defensive ice type, still has the problems that most of its matchups aren't super effective hits against it. However, for the matchups that it doesn't have that problem, like Holomantic, Joltooth, Colossotrops, all that stuff. Colossotrops can't have Rogue Assault actually, so you have to watch out for that. It does have the ability to just break through them. Can also provide itself as a pretty niche but mix up as a hasty user. You can try that, which I won't recommend, but it's certainly there. And then you can try more options overall. Overall, just being pretty good for Wobblisk in general. You got Mutagon here, which I will be putting in the A tier as of right. Which I will be putting in the A+ tier right now because it is arguably very strong. The main reason is that no melee wall in the game actually stops it besides Vesperatu, but it's not a melee wall. You gotta really consider it. And then you really can other count like Casimir Encased, however you just break through that because it doesn't do enough damage to you. So that is very strong for Mutagon. And the main problem with Mutagon still is its speed tier, so you can't really give it too much credit. Although pretty much Mutagon versus Semi-Sol or Balance is just a nightmare for those teams. And then you have a Kalos, which will be in the A- tier as well. There's going to be a lot of Loomians gonna like a Kalos in terms of roamers because they do have the metagame matchups like Soberseraptodon. I think this guy can also work a little bit. It really just depends. In general, it does have the matchups there. Drudge is also still a pretty common threat you can use. It doesn't break through its answers, but it can certainly have the ability to break through them once they're low enough and then sweep from there. It's just pretty solid all around. Pretty versatile and a Loomian. Aqua Body, of course, being the better ability to use. If you want to use a Loomian that can stop Soulburst or done, and of course provides yourself as a pretty good revenge killer, and not revenge killer, but sweeper with Drudge. Aggressive is not really needed because Aqua Body provides itself as a pretty solid utility for Hellstorm. And then you got Phasionaut, which admittedly I was putting pretty hard on this Loomian last time. However, I think it's actually pretty solid after using this and facing against it because malware is very good. Usually Loomians that are reliant on their abilities like Colossotrops, Joltooth arguably, yeah, Joltooth, Colossotrops, Tatab, Mutagon, Vesperatu, all those melee attackers that are reliant on their abilities get their abilities taken away, and that is a very good thing for Phasionaut. As one, it can kill them now, it can stop them, and it can just break through them, and of course it can pivot out of them, and now it can wall them, which providing offense for your team is a very good idea because for more seasoned and skilled players, this does provide a high skill ceiling of gameplay, as you can pivot in, get awarded for knowing that you're going to be clicking the right move, get a free heal, get a free pivots off because of its dual pivot coverage, not being walled by a lot of stuff except Sober's Gas Stroke, but you can just have a dark type for that. So Phasionaut, I think, is just a pretty solid Loomian for that time. And then of course you got Nevermare here, which I did put in my top 20s video, so I will be putting it in the A tier. Is just very solid overall because of how good it is. Nevermare overall is pretty good. Provoke, bulk up if you really want to. However, the main selling point with Nevermare is the fact that it can just have the ability to break through its answers or just break through the most of the teams because of Razor Sharp. Although being inconsistent, it's still a very, very threatening thing to have. And then you got the Gargoyle forms along with the Celesting and the Mask. So let's go over these quickly. Gargoyle defense, it is pretty undeniable that is in the top 4 conversation. I think this is probably one of the best Loomians in the entire game. There's really no competition here. It's just the best. It provides the most utility, most bulk, and it fits on a lot of teams, and that's just very strong for it. You got Gargoyle attack, which admittedly I will be putting it in the A- still. I still don't think it's B+. It's still on the verge of B+ though. I do have to admit that. However, it is still quite strong on offense because of its master ability being a very good revenge killer or cleaner depending on what you want it to be. However, the addition of icicle traps will be a little bit harder for it. However, it's not that common. Anyways, Gargoyle base, unviable. And then Celesting here is gonna be in the B tier. Didn't change all that much either. The Mask is gonna be in the A-. No, it's gonna be in the B+ tier. I definitely do recognize itself as a mask swap. Loomian is really strong in that area. However, the main thing is that most teams are just gonna figure out instantly because again, there's a lot of shared weakness because once people know that you're a mask swap mask, your whole shebang is just gone because they can just keep track of the energy of what is used and what the Loomian that you just replicated haven't used. So that is pretty easy to tell from there. However, just do what you want. And that's pretty much it. I'm gonna be organizing the tiers a little bit because I think A tier and A- is just filled up a lot. So let me just do that real quick. Let me get rid of this. So I'm gonna move quite a bit of these down. Yeah, I think this is fine. Valkyrie and A- is fine. I can live with this. And then I don't even want to rank this, bro. I don't even want to rank Imperior, but it is said we'll be putting this here. I think that is fine for it. Yeah, this is fine for it. Yeah, it's around the same viability as pretty much all of this. I'll move the clips down here. I don't think it can compete in any of these guys' tiers at all. Let's think here. I try to see which one can actually go down, but I think all of these guys are just pretty solid. I do have to pick though, because this is like way too much. I'll move Fairy Lift down. I'll move this one down, and I'll move this one down as well. I think like Vesperatu is in that level area anyway, so that is it. The S and A tier, A+ tier does feel like to be very cluttered, so Zulong, I can handle this moving down, although it is still in the very upper launch of higher tiers anyway, so it really doesn't matter. I will be moving these guys down because they're still the higher launch anyways, and their consistencies are enough to keep it A tier at least for me. And then that's pretty much it. Yeah, I can live with this. Nevermare, I'll keep it an A-. And then Soapers, Gastroop, this is fine. This I feel like is fine. Yeah, this is a pretty solid top tier. A-, I can pretty much, yeah, everything is fine here. Everything is fine into here. Everything is fine here if I do recall. Yeah, fine there. Everything in B- is good. C+, I don't care, bro. And then Soulburst forms are better. So people who skip to the end, here's your opportunity. Get your little tier list here. I'm also going to screenshot it for myself. So thanks for sticking to the end if you guys watched throughout the whole thing. This is of course on the shorter end, so yeah, maybe not, but overall, yeah. Thanks for watching this. If you want to leave your thoughts down below and roast me, agree with me, do whatever you want, just as long as you don't, I don't know. But anyways, yeah, this is all in preparation of my tier list on my team building video, so let me know what you want to see down in the comment section below. I will be covering the balance, offense, semi-stall, and then stall. I won't be covering bulky offense because that's not that metagame relevant right now. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is Con and Stoops, signing off to remind you that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.